In the outskirts of a forgotten Mexican town, where the dusty roads always seemed to sigh beneath the weight of tired footsteps and the wind-carried stories no one cared to hear, lived a small, frail girl named Alma, whose name meant soul. The life had chipped away at hers little by little, yet every morning, she woke with a gentle determination in her heart, knowing that survival depended on her courage and her refusal to surrender to despair, and it was this quiet resilience that guided her one fateful dawn as she walked to the large, rusted landfill where she often searched for scraps to sell, stepping through piles of discarded memories that once belonged to people who never imagined a child would someday dig through their past. Alma was only 11, yet her eyes held the depth of someone who had seen too much hunger that gnawed at her stomach, the loneliness of a home with no parents, and a future that felt like a shadow slipping further away with each passing day. But she carried on because she believed, with a stubborn innocence, that even in the ugliest corners of life, something beautiful might be waiting to be found. That morning, as the rising sun painted the sky with fragile strokes of pink and gold, Alma heard a sound unlike anything she had encountered in the landfill before: deep, pained breathing, followed by a soft groan, and instinctively, fear crawled up her spine. Predators sometimes lurked in abandoned places, desperate thieves too, and she knew that she should run, but a force stronger than caution rooted her feet to the ground. She crept toward the sound, pushing aside broken crates and old fabric, until her trembling hands pulled away a large sheet of torn cardboard, and that was when she gasped so loudly the birds nearby scattered in alarm. Lying in the dirt, half covered in ashes and shadows, was a man, massive, muscular, with long black hair tangled around his face, painted markings faded across his arms, and a woven headband that could only belong to someone from a proud and ancient lineage. Alma recognized the look, because her grandmother used to tell her stories of the great Apache warriors, noble protectors of their tribes, men who carried the thunder of mountains in their hearts and the wisdom of centuries in their eyes. The man's chest rose shakily, his breath shallow as if clinging to life with the last thread of his strength, and Alma felt her heart twist, not in fear, but in a kind of instinctive compassion she couldn't explain. "Sir, can you hear me?" she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind, but the man's eyes flickered open for a moment, revealing dark irises filled with pain and exhaustion. He murmured something in a language Alma didn't understand, then drifted back into unconsciousness, leaving the girl trembling between the choice of saving a stranger or walking away. But Alma was not the kind of child who abandoned another soul to the cruelty of fate. She could not, because she knew too well what it felt like to be invisible, forgotten, left behind. So with arms far too small but a heart impossibly large, she ran to fetch the little red wagon she used to collect recyclables, struggling to lift the man's heavy frame onto it, inch by inch, sweat stinging her eyes as she whispered, "I won't leave you here, I promise," even though no one had ever made such promises to her. The journey back to her small shack felt endless, the wagon wheels groaning beneath the man's weight, the sun climbing higher as if testing her endurance, but Alma refused to stop. She dragged him through the dirt path, past neighbors who barely glanced her way, because poverty had made everyone blind to suffering even when it passed right in front of them. When she finally reached her home, she collapsed beside the man, chest heaving, arms shaking, yet filled with a strange sense of purpose that gave her new strength. She fetched water, gently wiping the dirt from his face, revealing sharp features and a scar across his cheek that suggested a life of battles and hardships. She warmed a pot of broth using the small stove she had repaired herself out of scrap metal, feeding him spoonfuls in tiny intervals until he regained consciousness long enough to sip. Hours passed, then a full day, then two, until finally the man opened his eyes and stayed awake long enough to speak in broken Spanish mixed with English, telling her his name was Takoda, meaning friend to everyone, though he admitted with a tired smile that he had not felt like anyone's friend for many years. As he recovered, he shared fragments of his story. He had come searching for cultural remains stolen from his ancestral land, artifacts taken by smugglers who saw history only as something to be sold. He tried to stop them but was outnumbered, beaten, and left for dead in the very landfill where Alma found him. Alma listened with wide eyes, her heart aching at the injustice, but also swelling with admiration for the courage of a man who fought not for himself but for the memory of his people. Slowly, Takoda regained his strength, teaching Alma small things in return: how to track footprints in dirt, how to listen to the wind for warnings, how to stand tall even when life tried to bend you, lessons no one had ever cared to teach her. For the first time in her life, Alma felt seen, valued, guided. And Takoda, in those quiet days of healing, saw something in Alma too: a spark, a fierce kindness, a bravery that reminded him of the old stories his grandparents once told him. One evening, as orange light filled the shack, Takoda told Alma that her name, Soul, was perfect because she had given life back to him, both literally and spiritually. But danger had not disappeared. The smugglers who had attacked him were still out there, and Takoda feared they would return for the artifacts hidden in crates he had buried near the landfill. Alma, without hesitation, insisted on helping him retrieve them, and together they walked under the veil of night, following a path only Takoda seemed to understand. When they reached the burial spot, 3 silhouettes emerged from behind the piles of scrap, armed, angry, ready. Alma froze, but Takoda placed a protective arm in front of her, his old warrior spirit awakening with fierce clarity. Yet instead of violence, something unexpected happened. Alma stepped forward, her small voice trembling yet strong, appealing to the men with words she didn't know she had inside her. She spoke of history, of families, of the sacred right to preserve roots and identity, things she understood even without belonging to any tribe, because she too knew the pain of losing everything. The men hesitated, not expecting such courage from a mere child, and in that moment of pause, Takoda took the chance to negotiate, offering them a peaceful exit if they left the artifacts and never returned. Reluctantly, perhaps even ashamed, they agreed, disappearing into the night like shadows that had lost their power. Takoda turned to Alma with astonishment in his eyes, not just because she had been brave, but because she had changed the outcome with nothing but sincerity and a heart incapable of hatred. In the days that followed, Takoda contacted members of his community, who came to retrieve him and the treasured artifacts, but before leaving, he knelt before Alma and told her that she had saved more than his life, she had restored his faith in humanity. He promised she would never be alone again. True to his word, months later, a community representative returned with a scholarship, offering Alma a place in a cultural program dedicated to teaching children resilience, heritage, and leadership. They had heard about the girl who stood in front of criminals with nothing but kindness as her shield, and they believed she deserved a future as bright as the sun she had walked under all her life. Alma accepted, tears streaming down her face, not because she was leaving behind the pain of poverty, but because she was stepping into a world where she finally mattered. And as Takoda watched her flourish from afar, he often told her that destiny had brought them together not by blood, but by something stronger, the powerful truth that one act of compassion can change not just one life, but 2. Alma never returned to the landfill. Instead, she carried forward the lesson she learned the day she found a dying Apache beneath a heap of forgotten things, that even in the most discarded places of the world, the greatest treasures are the human souls we choose to save.